The Élysée Palace is looking less like a seat of power and more like a revolving door of political ambitions. Prime Minister Michel Barnier's government has fallen after a historic no-confidence vote, plunging France into unprecedented chaos. 331 members of the National Assembly said au revoir to Barnier's administration, surpassing the 288 votes needed to give him le bout. Barnier's tenure as Prime Minister was shorter than a politician's promise. A mere 91 days. It's like he barely had time to warm his seat before being shown the door. His controversial budget, which included €40 billion in spending cuts and €20 billion in tax hikes, went over about as well as suggesting the French work through lunch. Barnier, the former EU Brexit negotiator, couldn't negotiate his way out of this mess. From untangling Britain from the EU to tangling himself in French politics, he's gone from Brexit to Frexit faster than you can say Article 50. The vote saw an unholy alliance between the far-left New Popular Front and the far-right National Rally. It's like seeing socialists and nationalists sharing a cheese board, utterly unthinkable, until Miao, Marine Le Pen of the National Rally, criticised Barnier's rigid stance, saying, "We've reached the moment of truth. Barnier's budget is as inflexible as his hair." Meanwhile, Mathilde Panot from the New Popular Front called the budget a provocation against voters. The Assemblée Nationale is more divided than a French person choosing between wine and cheese. But let's talk numbers, shall we? France's debt is ballooning faster than a politician's ego, reaching a whopping 113% of GDP. Inflation is hovering around 1.3%. But that's cold comfort when you're paying through the nose for your daily baguette. Barnier's budget cuts were about as popular as suggesting the French take shorter lunch breaks. His austerity measures would have hit public services harder than a misfired champagne cork at a Bastille Day celebration. Speaking of celebrations, the streets of Paris have seen more action than a Luc Besson film, with protesters marching faster than a waiter rushing to end their shift. The French are revolting against working longer. Apparently, there's more to life than just eating, drinking and striking. The upcoming pension reforms will gradually increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. Mon Dieu, the French might actually have to work past the afternoon cheese course. But here's where it gets really juicy, my friends. France's military aid to Ukraine might be put on hold. Looks like they'll have to defend themselves with strongly worded letters and disapproving looks for Miao. Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu warned that the recent government collapse may slow support, saying, "If we slow the order of new equipment, there will be a slowdown of deliveries for Ukraine." Zut alors! That's €3.3 billion of military aid potentially going up in smoke. This might be the best thing to happen to Russia since they discovered you could ferment potatoes. President Emmanuel Macron is feeling more cornered than a mime in a round room. He's now tasked with finding a new prime minister who can navigate a parliament more fractured than a CRM broil crust. Potential successors include Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu, who's about as exciting as unsalted butter, and centrist François Bayrou, whose political stance is as middle of the road as a white line on the Champs-Élysées. The race to become the next PM is hotter than a freshly baked political scandal, and probably just as half-baked. European leaders are watching France's political meltdown with more interest than a sommelier eyeing a corrupt wine bottle. This instability could have ripple effects across the EU faster than you can say fiscal policy. France's stance on EU immigration and economic regulations might shift more than a French person's loyalty during a World Cup final. Meanwhile, the French media is having a field day. It's like watching vultures circling a particularly juicy political carcass. The long-term consequences for France's economy and its position within the EU could be as messy as a toddler eating spaghetti. This political crisis is giving Brexit a run for its money in the European chaos stakes. It's the first successful no-confidence vote since 1962, back when the Beatles were still together and people thought the moon was made of cheese. If you're enjoying this French political soufflé, don't let it fall flat. Rise to the occasion and hit that like button faster than a French politician backpedaling on campaign promises. As France dives into political chaos head first, one thing's for sure, it's going to be a wilder ride than a Parisian taxi driver with a personal vendetta against traffic laws. Democracy might be messy, but in France, it's also deliciously entertaining. I'm Ron de Parmesan, and this has been another Newscat special report.